16 of the world's best.
That's a good point.
There are some of the big names that are absolutely missing from there. This is a superstar show.
Maybe we can get like a camera shot of the 8 crushed keys and just zoom out from that and be like, guys, this is how good the competition is right now.
You know, yesterday in the studio, they were having a discussion about who is the master crusher of keys out of all the players. And I don't know if you guys noticed, but Nodirbek Abdusattorov, when he was crushing the key,
he loved it.
He was enjoying it. He was the only player who didn't cover his ears. He did it with both hands. And he means business. He loves that part of it. Definitely the master crusher.
If anything, it makes me a little bit frightened how much he enjoyed that. He was savoring every moment. He'd like to crush some more. We'll see if it's possible for him to do that with the white pieces now in game number 2.
And we start here with the CARO-KANN defense, although it's kind of transposing now. It's kind of morphing into a King's Indian attack. White here with a quick fianchetto, castling the king, pawns on e4. It resembles the King's Indian defense with the black pieces, just with colors reversed, and some pressure there indirectly on the black center. This is something that Firouzja's been doing since he was a child, playing the CARO-KANN defense and playing it very, very ambitiously. Black, in the meantime, also fianchettoed, also with a nice pawn center and full tension ahead. I just want to mention on the topic of key crushing as well, all of the 4 players who made it through that kind of lower bracket in the group stage, they all crushed 2 keys. It was always the player who kind of dropped first that rose to the top. It's
a good point, actually. Yeah, the more you win yesterday in the group stages, the fewer keys you crush. Isn't that interesting? Obviously, that stops now because it's very much single elimination. But I feel like Nodirbek, he's had a little bit of a taste for it, whereas Firouzja still waiting for his opportunity. So maybe that just makes that first key crush even sweeter.
And we'll see if he gets that opportunity. In the meantime, there is a small threat of breaking the tension finally in the center. Black's e-pawn is attacked 3 times. Okay, he's arguing that it's not a threat, Alireza Firouzja. The black knight jumping to the edge of the board. I was looking at tension in the center. The white queen, white rook, and knight all lined up against this pawn. But there would have been tactics in the air, potentially. The white queen might have found herself pinned if he had gone for anything direct there. Instead, he's built the V pawn structure with his pawns on the light squares. Here, Nodirbek Abdusattorov all on the light squares, forming a nice little formation there, but about to get attacked. The black knight threatening a nasty fork, hitting a pawn on c2.
That's the big idea. But David, like you mentioned, there were tactics earlier where white, in fact, looked like was about to be pawn up. But, you know, tricky Alireza had traps of his own.
Yeah, and if we just go back one move to show the subtleties lurking beneath the surface, after Alireza decided to bring his knight to the edge of the board, we could have seen a pawn capture, and here black would have taken back, and knight takes e5 now, would have walked into the black queen, swooping down, a line opened, and here black's queen just too active, beautifully placed, the black knight coming into the b4 square, nice outpost. Black's bishop opened up on the long diagonal, and this was just something to avoid, simply for Abdusattorov. So all of these tactics, all of the activity here we see with the arrows, just all in black's favor. So if we go back to the game situation, then we see a very different game state.
So all of these sidelines, these complications avoided here, deciding not to go into those potential continuations where the black queen could infiltrate, which is very, very reasonable indeed. After the knight went to the edge of the board, of course, still took b4 as an outpost. And after an intermezzo move, the question now gets asked, are we okay with the bishop for knight trade on b4? Queen comes out to d2. It looks like the Silicon's not particularly liking that move, although on the surface, it looks reasonable enough.
I think the reason that, you know, it might come to mind because the queen still remains vulnerable. You're actually inviting black to develop the rook coming out with a tempo. Your queen won't just move once, it's going to move a couple of times right now.
So would we have moved to e3 instead?
It was an option that he could have thought about, but again, it's a move with a heartbeat, right? And that means that it's very important that you play quickly. I think the players have realized it's not important to find objectively the best move here. As long as you know what your follow-up is, and Nodirbek clearly did, he wants to place the queen lining it up against the black queen, also putting pressure on that b4 knight. He keeps the calm on the clock as well.
It's hard to blame that sort of move, right? Because the knight on b4 is targeting that pawn on c2, and you don't want anything getting forked. So moving the queen across with the idea of going to c3 makes perfect logical sense. You don't want an opportunity for black to unleash those kind of tactics. So it's interesting that there were potentially better options available. But again, like you said, Tanya, if there are better options available, that's when you sort of save your time and try and use your bank of time to identify those critical positions and see if you can gain just that little bit of a small advantage by making a slightly better decision. Choosing when to go into the tank is such a difficult skill.
And talking of a small advantage, the Black Knights now are hopping forwards. The White Queen may be feeling a bit misplaced. Queens should be often behind their infantry. The cavalry, they should be behind the pawns and knights. The White Queen actually prevents White from kicking away the Black Knight on the b4 square. Pawn would have loved to be on c3 instead. And already, computer giving an over +1 advantage for Black.
Oh, wow.
That is significant considering its level material, its almost symmetrical pawn structure. It simply reflects the fact that the Black Knights are coming. And I wouldn't be shocked here if Alireza Firouzja decides now to plant another knight. There we go, in the white half of the board.
I'm looking at this thinking, I'm wondering if there is an even stronger way we can punish White's dark squared bishop, because it really doesn't feel like it's going anywhere anytime soon. If you're going to trade it off for the knight at this point, the knight feels like such a powerful piece compared to the dark squared bishop. Why not chop it off straight away?
It's what you'd want to do, but Black has these beautiful options of just recapturing it with a pawn, opening up the queen to that c line, and then that c2 weakness becomes a clear target.
Right.
Now, you might think you can capture it, but there's also a possibility of actually just trying to kick that out with a potential fork. That c-pawn right now can go to c3, and it feels like, hey, wait a second, did Alireza just blunder? Of course not. Alireza does not blunder. c3 would run into knight d3 because that square has been left vacated, undefended by the pawn moving forward, and in fact it's Black that comes in with a devastating fork.
Yeah, you can't remove those knights without them being replaced by equally strong pawns. There's going to be a bind either way. There are knight forks in the air, and if you can't touch these super strong pieces of your opponents, you just feel uncomfortable. It's psychological here, objectively as well, White suffering, but a 3-minute time deficit and a bit of a smelly position here for Nodirbek. It doesn't bode well for him.
Also, if you White does have the ability to trade off both knights now, right? Let's not pretend that's impossible, but what ends up happening is that they get replaced by pawns. The position opens up even more, and hey, would you look at that? Firouzja has the pair of bishops, very happy to go into the late middle game, into the end game with that potential advantage.
100%, and I think that is what makes this position so difficult for Nodirbek Abdusattorov, that he's playing with the white pieces, and within the first 19 moves, he's come under so much pressure. Look at the amount of times the white queen has just jumped around and landed in perhaps the most inactive square on the board. Right. And that's definitely not a part of some grand plan that Nodirbek had. He's in big trouble. You know, this is the makings of game one. Alireza Firouzja outplaying Nodirbek Abdusattorov so far, but this time, can he get the ball at the back of the net?
Yeah, that's a big check. Unless he's thinking of sacrificing his rook for that knight, then the white king needs to shuffle into the corner. Nodirbek kind of talking to himself there on the camera, trying to will himself to find something. But yeah, he spent 5 of his first 19 moves with his queen, and the white queen is so poorly placed. And there we go, he sacrifices his rook for that knight. That is pure desperation. He's trying to kick the other black knight back in order to install a knight of his own in the center. The white knight will land on d5 potentially. At least one strong piece, but surely not enough compensation.
I have to ask the question, because king h1 was an option in the position, but Nodirbek choosing to sacrifice the exchange instead. Was that necessary? What would have happened if king h1 was played? Why was that inferior perhaps to what went on here?
Yeah, the current board state, it looks like black has a material advantage. Rook for knight, big lead there for Alireza. But if the white king had moved away, we show this on the green analysis board right now, the black knight would likely have jumped back, attacking the white queen, forcing it to move for a 6th time in this game. And when it does move, the black knight takes a pawn and hitting another one on f2. Once the black knight moves out the way, the black dark squared bishop would soon be unleashed on the diagonal. It's a key pawn, a very important central one. And this would have given black another different type of decisive advantage.
Amazing. And we thought, okay, actually, sacrificing the exchange there is probably preferable to having to deal with this long-term positional disadvantage where you are just playing for 2 results, and it almost gets a little bit depressing to try and defend.
Yeah, depressing is a good word. And often the top players in the world, they try to just change the momentum. If they know they're in trouble anyway, they just try to change the nature of the position. If they're going to suffer, give up material, at least create some threats of your own.
And it's going to be hard to create threats of his own, but Nodirbek is trying. He's not only pushing the black knight away, he wants to get his own knight to the center of the board on d5, where at least it will cut black's rook activity, that extra rook that has just been won by Alireza. But I have to say that so far in this match, Alireza has simply outclassed Nodirbek. Yes, he didn't win game 1, but he was so close. He was the only one pushing for that win from start to finish.
It was the psychological victory, perhaps, in game number 1. Extremely strong stuff, and really asking some questions now of Abdusattorov, saying, look, even with the black pieces, I'm able to apply this much pressure. We should point out, how do you put it? The game is not won yet. One of the hardest games to win in chess is a winning position. Converting that into a full point is unbelievably difficult and often something that is hard to see just from watching. But game number 1 was arguably also a good example of this.
And I think, to your point, this is not going to be an easy convert. Yes, black has an extra exchange, but focus on that knight at the center of the board, the knight on d5. He's going to solidify that with the c-pawn moving one step forward as well, c4, and basically deny Alireza's rooks any open line, any activity. At some point, Alireza will try to break through with the f-pawn moving forward, and you can see it. There's some frustration on him there. He doesn't see a clear path right now. The knight goes back. I don't believe Nodirbek will trade that knight. c4 is the move that I'm expecting here.
There we go, played. That is a rock-solid knight, just as strong as the black knights earlier. Yes, he's down material, but he's changed the trend. He's also made up most of the time deficit, Nodirbek. That was an inspired decision to sacrifice. A good tip for everyone at home, defend actively.
I've got a follow-up chess coach question for you guys. That white knight on d5 is undeniably a monster piece right now. There are 2 ways black can try and take it off. The knight can play back to e7, or once the queen moves out of the way, the bishop can go to b7. Which minor piece would you rather give up for that knight, or are you happy for it to stay there?
I think short term it's okay, you play around it, but long term you have to get rid of that stallion in the center. Most likely you want to trade it off for a bishop, since the center is so blocked. Knights thrive more than bishops. Very hard to imagine any great diagonals for those pieces. But here we see Alireza maybe going for the other white knight potentially. The black knight also has some nice jumping posts. So we'll see a bit of a mirror image potentially if bishop takes knight next, the black knight jumping into the center.
That's a beautiful positional idea that Alireza's just played out. You know, planting his bishop to a square, always threatening that trade that David mentioned, so that you've got the d4 square, a beautiful spot for the knight. Having that rook, that extra rook on the board for black, is only as useful once he starts getting those open lines. So Alireza, he's preparing right now. At some point, there will be a challenge on the board, either with the knight at the center or one of the pawns moving forward, threatening to open up files for that rook.
So let me simplify here for the folks at home. Whether you're supporting the white or the black pieces here, it does look like, based on pawn breaks, f5 is the square to keep your eyes glued on.
Yep. It will come sooner or later, probably not right now, just because white's pieces are so centralized. All of white's pieces look like they're fighting against any pawn break with f5. We might also see the black knight jump into the center at some point, either to b4, d4, but for now, a bit of a maneuvering phase. The players are basically dead level on the clock, heart rate far from level, but it is compensated for Alireza's heart rate by his material advantage.
It's a game around that break. You know, all the last few moves that have happened, the way white placed the pieces, the way Alireza's put his rook behind the e-pawn, it's all directed towards hinting at that f5 pawn push. It needs to be timed really well. And I think part of Alireza's strategy is to keep delaying it till the point Nodirbek is down to those final minute in the game, so that he doesn't have enough time to be able to counter that accurately.
We're maneuvering all the minor pieces. What's stopping black from just going rook f7, rook f8, and doubling on the f-file? Is there something else the rooks need to be looking out for?
No, I think is the answer.
Oh,
I think
okay.
we might well just see that idea. I think that's a great decision. You just want to tease the opponent first. He just moves his king, not committing anything here, not ruining anything. We'll see the black rook set up perfectly, and only when it's down to 1 minute each, then you go for it.
There's also no increment, so it could also be mind games. You're making your opponent think, oh, maybe there is something else. Maybe there is a second weakness that I haven't actually considered before committing, even though it gets played now. So just keeping Abdusattorov guessing a little bit.
He is. He's just shuffling pieces around because it's Nodirbek who needs to be careful. And sometimes it's hard to keep the tension, you know, and which is why Nodirbek does take on d4. We see a trade. And in fact, it's Nodirbek who's pushed his f-pawn. Another trade at the center of the board. And white's pawn's looking really good right now there.
Yeah, it's much easier to push white central pawns than any of the black pawns right now. I don't see any good pawn breaks actually for Firouzja here. Suddenly white has full control over the light squares, and maybe the status quo won't be broken, maybe it's just level, but that's good news for Abdusattorov.
You know, again, notice how there's no single open line, and he blunders. He allows queen takes pawn. The black queen pinned.
There's a beautiful diagonal here that the white bishop has been sitting on for ages. Black loses a pawn in the center, because if that queen is captured, we would see bishop retaking, and when the black rook moves, the white bishop will retreat. The central pawns for white are marching forward. The black bishop is dead on the side of the board. That is not participating in this battle at all. This is a big, big advantage suddenly psychologically and on position for Nodirbek. He's turned it around.
This is unbelievable. We went from a position where we thought, okay, we're going to shuffle around a little bit, and then we're going to watch black play f5, to a position where there are tactics on the board for white. f5 looks like it's a million miles away for black, and suddenly the tables have turned a little bit. Did Firouzja just wait too long?
They didn't turn a little bit. They've completely turned around. If anyone, white's the one who's going to be pushing in this endgame. You know, he's got an extra pawn as well for that exchange. And all the ideas that were pointed out, get the bishop back. You have these beautiful bishop pairs on these stunning diagonals. e5 coming next. What's important here is that for white, the follow-up is so easy. The moves are going to come quick. For Alireza, it's going to be much harder. He's down to 2 minutes on the clock. It's now about trying to hold this position if you're black.
And I'm slightly surprised that Nodirbek pushes forward, but it is his style. He's very direct as a player. Now he drops back with the bishop. Now white does not have two connected pawns, but you do have a light squared bishop that could soon come to life. He tries to get it in, creates a threat, but watch out. There's a hit on the white rook. You've got to be careful where you step. You can't step to the side and block this pawn, since rook takes bishop would win, and the black bishop would suddenly come to life. I think that was a bit of a misstep. He could have prevented the black pawn from moving. And here, suddenly it's a 3-result position. Question mark given. Who can hold their nerve?
And he again places it on a square, which is in the eye line of the black bishop. Alireza calculating, can he go for that same sacrifice? Pick up the d6 pawn, and he does it. Rook takes rook is the only move. And now the d6 pawn falls. Black's d3 pawn is a powerful one. This is Nodirbek Abdusattorov pulling the brakes with that trade. This one's headed to a draw.
Wow, after all of those fireworks, twists and turns, Alireza with the advantage, suddenly Nodirbek striking back. It's going to fizzle out. Opposite color bishops with rooks, with queens on, do have chances dynamically, but here both sides will just block on their respective color complexes.
Yeah, we've had so many games so far in the Esports World Cup where the opposite colored bishops were a danger, because you had rooks on the board, you had queens on the board, and the bishops could work together with other pieces to form some really quite scary looking threats, but not in this situation. When it's the bishops and nothing else, one side dominates the light squares, the other dominates the dark squares, and you effectively sit there and go, right, let's call it a day and move on. But once again, Alireza Firouzja, the player who was pressing for the win, first with the white pieces, now with the black.